Oh, thank you very much, everybody listening in. Excuse us for our rough start, but we'll make the rest of the 40 minutes wonderful. So thank you very much. And we have a very distinguished panel to wrap up 2 days of great exchange. And this one is focused on leading in the future economy. It's a very broad subject. I think you're going to find this panel to share some excellent thoughts that build on what you've been hearing for the last 2 days. Let me start out with a broad view of leadership, and then our panel members will add their individual perspectives. A very wise person told me once when I asked them, how could you tell a leader? They said, people are following that person. And I think that's not a bad guidance. And so the question is, who will you follow? What does it take for you to follow someone? Because that's the question everybody asks when we need to lead through anything, including a future economy. As I think about it, I will follow somebody that's being very open with me, that's sharing all the information, the good, the bad, even that information they don't fully understand what it means yet, but they're sharing it with me. And they have to be very open with me before I can really start to understand what they're trying to say. And then once we've been very open, I get somewhat less understanding, and then I build some trust. And trust is really the cornerstone of leadership. So if we think about every one of the topics that we must lead this future economy into, including all the health topics that we've been talking about for the last 2 days, and the trusting of the vaccine, the trusting our scientists, it starts with this openness, understanding, and real trust. So I hope as you listen to each one of our speakers go through here today, you'll get a sense of how they see those things from their perspectives and their particular walks of life. So with that, Roberto, would you please start us off with your perspective on leading into this future economy?
Chad, it's great to follow you in this conversation, but not just here. So I think that in the GFCC, one of the things that you actually mentioned yesterday that we've been doing over the years is to work with leaders from across the globe. We have more than 25, say 30 countries represented in our organization. In some way, we are kind of unique because what we're trying to do is to be a mixer at a global scale. So one of the things that we have managed to do over the years, and yesterday you again launched our 2020 Global Innovation Principles. So when you talk about building a rapport, developing trust, I think one of the things that we managed to do over the years was to have everybody coming from 30 nations, coming from university, from industry, from private entities like councils and competitiveness and government agencies to be on the same page. In some way, we managed to really to build this type of trust that can allow us to issue a statement like this. So this is one thing that I wanted to highlight, because I think that one of the things that we have in our network is diversity that couples with the capacity to build some consensus in this diverse community. And just building on what you said, I think that there are 3 things that probably come out at this point in this conversation. What's needed to build a future, and we heard throughout the day, but also yesterday and in recent conversations that we had in the GFCC, including the remarks that our board member here in Shiguchi from Japan just made, that we need to be purposeful and to think forward, to design the future. And we need trust to do that. So far, we have people working to co-create principles. How can we take that and turn that into action? So this is thing 1. The second thing is we have this diverse network with a global footprint. We have distributed resources. And more, we also hear today, not just from the panel that Charles was leading, on new ways to allocate capital, new ways of organizing, new types of organizations. How can we make impact working with distributed resources around the globe that are now accessible? And third, how can we actually expand the conversation? And this is something that we're working in the GFCC to bring new voices, new people, some emerging future generation leaders to be part of this. So I think that there are lots of opportunities to work together. It's great to follow you in this conversation, Chad.
Thank you, Roberto. A great way to kick us off. And I'm really glad you referred back to the principles, because they're such an important part of leadership. Larry, your perspective, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. And great to be here today. I think you said it in the beginning, Chad, when you talked about followership rather than leadership. And you have to earn followership. And you do that through trust, as you said. But I think the three things to add to that, to what you said, in the past, leaders led with title. I'm the chief executive, I'm the managing director, I'm the prime minister. But in an innovation age, title's irrelevant, because smart people go to the person that can answer their question. They follow the authority of knowledge. And we're seeing that in the way society is following science and scientists and trusting them, because they have the answer that the people need right now to navigate through this crisis. So titles are relevant. You've got to earn the followership, and you do that by trust, and you do that by having the knowledge. And when you don't know, you admit you don't know. And most particularly, you don't fire people when they screw up, depending on why they screw up. You have to own stuff. You as leader, when someone screws up, when someone fails, that's your fault. You own that. When your team succeeds, they own that. So as a CEO, you own the bad stuff, your team owns the good stuff. And it's extraordinary what a team who truly believes and sees their leader live that mantra, it's extraordinary what a team like that will do for a leader like that. And then finally, the people that created the past are unlikely to create the future. It's not going to be built by the same men in blue suits that built the past. So in an innovation age where there's such high ambiguity, diversity of perspectives, diversity in all of its dimensions is the compass to navigate us through any crisis, any ambiguity, any change, but particularly in innovation and to recover our economy. And if Deborah was here, I would point out that Deborah is a great example of that kind of courageous authenticity. Deborah doesn't lead with title, she leads with truth. Deborah doesn't lead with all the things that she's done in her life. She leads with courageous authenticity. She's willing to say things that other leaders aren't willing to say. They're not willing to take the risk, but she's willing to say it because it's the right thing and it needs to be said. I think that's the future of leadership, and it's a shame Deborah's not here today, because she'd be a great example for people to follow. And thanks, Chad.
Well, Larry, thanks very much. And we'll be sure we pass that on to Deborah, and because I think it's very much appropriate what you say. While you've got the floor, if I could follow up just a bit, you lead a very large research organization, very successful. What particular challenge have you had in this year that you haven't had in the past in leading that?
Yeah, so we were fairly well set up to go digital and work from home. We moved about 70 or 80% of our workforce within a few days, and we didn't suffer from a significant productivity. So that was good. We'd invested heavily in digital transformation already, so that was good. But the challenge is, as an organization, Australia was leading a push to fight bushfires at the end of last year and trying to bring technology and science to bear to anticipate and fight those fires. Then we had severe hail that took out about half of our major site in Canberra, massive damage there. And then we had months and months of smoke to deal with, and then we had coronavirus. And it's kind of like the perfect storm for 2020. Amazes me is how just reaching out and connecting. We have 57 sites around the country. Just reaching out, and whether it was on phone or on video, getting people together virtually and just letting them know that we were thinking about them wherever they were. Particularly the folks in Victoria when they went through that terrible lockdown period. It just made so much difference to know that the leadership team actually cared. And I think that's so important because that, again, is part of what engenders followership. And the team have delivered so well, working on the vaccine, working on the bushfire recovery, working on the economic recovery and the advanced manufacturing plan for the government. So the crisis has, inspired them to sort of do more. I'm frankly worried about how I continue to keep them safe and well, because they are working so hard, but they're passionate and inspired because they want to fight this crisis. And I just finished by saying, Chad, I lived in America for almost 30 years. That's the American spirit. Doesn't matter how big the recession is, doesn't matter how big the crisis is, America stands up. No matter how hard it gets knocked down, it stands up and it rebuilds, and it rebuilds better every time. And that's something I think is really inspiring about your great country, of seeing that in my people as we lead through this crisis.
Yeah, Larry, thanks much. Very helpful. Jane, your perspective on leadership in this future economy.
Thank you, Chad. Look, I'll just follow on from some of those comments that Larry's made about a title doesn't give you the respect or the ability to lead, and especially in a place like Australia where we have a culture of questioning authority. It might come from our convict background, but we just don't follow blindly. We like to question authority. I'd like to maybe focus on the COVID response of Australia, because I thought that is a great example of incredible leadership, where the Prime Minister took control very early, and he engendered trust in the Australian population by taking very decisive and courageous actions, and he was seen to be assisted by his National Security Cabinet, which included the Minister for Health, and we heard a lot from the Minister for Health as to what frameworks that were already in place that allowed them to immediately set up, incident crisis control, and they were highly visible. I think the visibility of our leadership team really engendered that trust in the population that everything was being done right. They were extraordinarily competent. The Minister for Health, Minister Hunter, is very modest, but he has an incredible handle on the health portfolio and has been in that position for a number of years. So he already had an incredible trust of the medical community, the medical corporations in Australia. So he was able to personally talk to just a huge range of stakeholders in this potential crisis, in order to garner our best defence against the COVID crisis, and in order to feed in the best medical advice to the National Cabinet. So competence really is important in gaining that trust, and we could see that competence in spades in our daily briefings. So talking about daily briefings, communication, a good leader and being able to lead it really comes from being able to communicate that message well. Our Prime Minister was a great communicator, as are his key ministers. So, and they were courageous, and that courage was seen. They made unpopular decisions that were not popular around the world, such as closing our borders early, stopping international flights into Australia. So I might leave it there, but I mean, leadership, followership, as Larry says, comes from engendering, trust, that confidence in your leader.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I can't agree more. It's a great way to start us off, Jane. Charles, I welcome you, and I thank you for your leadership and the fact we're having this conference. So you assured us you were going to make this happen one way or another. So thank you so much for your leadership, and we appreciate your comments on leadership. Charles, the floor is yours.
Oh, I'm most grateful for those comments, Chad, and it couldn't be done without the wonderful teamwork and leadership of the Minister, Greg Hunt, and Minister Andrews, and Deborah Wynne-Smith, and you too, Chad, who's been tremendously supportive. The GFCC is a wonderful gathering of leaders in the world, and I get great inspiration by mankind if we look at history over the last 150 years. And if I'll talk about the last 10 years, but if you look back 150 years ago, electricity invented by Edison, the refrigerator in 1899, a patent by Albert Marshall, The telephone was invented by Alexander Graham Bell in the 19th century. Steel with Andrew Carnegie. These are 4 examples of things that leadership by mankind, individuals with innovation, endeavour and skill change the world, improve the standard of living of mankind and helped all humanity. And if we look today, a number of areas where there's humans leading, entrepreneurs with access to capital, which is more easily accessible and very important. They have not only the entrepreneurs leading and innovative, but also having the technology. For example, the internet, digitization, the use of social media, the improvement of communications and entertainment to make people happy. You look at robotics and what that's done, improving industry efficiency in mining, healthcare, genomics, and penicillin. If you look back decades and what penicillin has done to save lives, and what's happening in genomics. And you look at digitization too, and you look at the CSIRO, and I also have to compliment Larry Marshall and the CSIRO, who've been tremendous leaders, and their inventions and their efforts to commercialize and work with the private sector. It's been just a thrill to watch their work and the work they've been doing with the GFCC and the US Council on Competitiveness too. Agriculture and the productivity tools, artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, I could go on and on. But what we have here, in summary, is new way. We've got harmonious, peaceful people working together, and the value system is very important with humans leadership. Trust, integrity, decency, kindness to one another, and a sense of charity, all combine to make the world a better place, improve the standard of living, for everyone.
Fantastic, Charles. I think it's a great summary of what we've been talking about today. Roberto, you've left your home country, come to the U.S. to lead the GFCC. You're temporarily back in your home country. What is it you've seen about leadership across those borders between Brazil and the U.S. that really stood out to you, that helped make you be a better leader?
I think that there's one big difference, Chad, that really connects to what was talked throughout the day. I think that Larry mentioned 2 things that really caught my attention. One is the authenticity of knowledge, and I'll be back to that. And the other one is diversity. So Brazil, like the US, is a country made of immigrants. But if we have a look today, the global average for immigrants in populations is 3.5%. It means that in average, countries had 3.5% of their populations comprised by immigrants. In the United States, 15% of the population was born abroad. In Brazil, that is less than 1%. So in contrast, when I contrast Brazil with the United States, one thing that I see is that part of the lack of competitiveness and innovation that Brazil has is that because it left or a kind of abandoned a focus on diversity that countries like the US have. And I think that's very important.
Oh, that's a great perspective. Jane, I was so happy to see you talking about your national leaders with such pride. Because everywhere in the world, you can't do that today. What is magical about Australia that you've been able to select these leaders in multiple, and they've been able to demonstrate it so well? Is there something unique about the population and how to read people? Or what would be the learning maybe other countries could learn from Australia?
It's an interesting question because naturally you do have pride in your own country. And having lived abroad in both your wonderful country and in the UK, one of the things that I guess stood out to me in the culture of Australians is that we talk about mateship, and this, you know, we say "G'day, mate." You know, we have this. Everyone likes to mimic our mate, and I think there truly is an egalitarian attitude in Australia where, whilst we do have, I don't want to paint a panacea where we don't have issues or pockets of problems, but generally speaking, we are there to help each other. And I think that comes out in the crisis situation. So Larry mentioned we had bushfires before the pandemic, and there were other issues. But we're used to cyclones or hurricanes and floods and bushfires, and we're used to crisis events, and that brings us together as a country more often than tears us apart. So we see incredible leadership in those crises. Most of the crises I've seen have had great leadership. And then after the leadership of our named leaders, we actually have incredible community responses. So after there are floods or hurricanes, we see this massive bands of volunteers come together and organise themselves to provide some leadership within the community. That's just self-led. So I guess there's just that's the natural culture there of getting together and supporting each other. And I guess we don't, as I say, we don't give our leaders authority unless they've earned it. I am very proud of Australia's response. The figures speak for themselves. We have very low death rates. We've had a few outbreaks, which we've managed well. We're continuing to have those outbreaks, but I have great confidence in the leadership of the responses that's happening now.
Well, that's great. It's really good to hear and quite encouraging. But I think it speaks so well for the people of Australia. You know, my surname is Holiday. I think that's a pretty common name in Australia. I believe my relatives got on the wrong boat. I should have been from Australia. I feel very much at home. Charles, you know, I think about leadership in a lot of ways, but yeah, I think about you reaching out to GFCC, seeing value in this organization for Australia, and having us there. What is it you saw about the GFCC that you thought it was worthwhile for your country to be involved in this process? Charles, could you hear me?
Looks like he might have had a screen fail.
Yeah, it looks like we just lost him. They're rebooting him. Larry, while we're waiting on Charles, your stories about reaching out to your individual people reminded me so much of stories I've heard from Shell, the company I work with now. We had offshore platforms in the Gulf of Mexico that were hit by 8 weather events, tornadoes or very serious storms, where we had to evacuate 8 times in the middle of COVID. And we just never anticipated something like that. But indeed, the people did it all safely. Nobody contracted COVID, and the rigs were run safely. And what hit me is the individual telling me had reached out to every one of those people to thank them and send the message home to their family. So you're reaching out to your people to show real caring about what they've done is just the kind of example of leadership that's there. What sprung you into action? It seemed like you had an instinct that said, this is what I have to do. I don't care how many meetings I can't go to or ministers I can't meet. I've got to go thank my people. What from your background or experience gave you that instinct?
Yeah, so I ran companies through 3 major recessions and also 9/11 and in the US. And 9/11 was different from the others because something happened to America that had never happened before. And unlike other crises, CEOs kind of had to be a bit more like parents for their people, because your people just did not, the whole frame of reference had been, sort of shattered. And in a startup, you tend to spend in tech startup in Silicon Valley, you tend to spend an enormous amount of time trying to beat the competition. I probably spent a good 6 months immediately after 9/11 just sitting down with families of my employees to talk to them, to give them comfort that it was going to be okay, that we would come out of this. It's the only time I've seen Americans actually sort of really stumble, because it was something that had never happened before. And this is what COVID is like for us. You know, we're disconnected. We can't visit our family and loved ones because they're in other states. We can't travel. And it's that same sort of, you know, our whole frame of reference has been shattered. So it's got to be a leader's first job to make sure that their people understand that there's a way through this. And you know, we have a pretty clear vision of how we can navigate our way out, and we've led with a lot of vision the last 5 years to really grow the organization. But when I talked to people for the first few months, I didn't go near vision, because they're not ready to hear a vision yet. They just want to know they're going to be okay. They want to know that they can do something to help their countrymen. They want to know that they can do something with their science to help the world. That's the most important thing right now. And vision came, the receptiveness to vision and how we work our way out, that came about 3 or 4 months into the crisis, actually. But for the first 3 months, it was all about, you know, not just keeping them safe, but what else can we do for the people around us? And I think that spirit of generosity, it's what Charles mentioned, and Chad, you said it at the beginning, that spirit of you know, we're leaders because we think we can make the world better through what we do. That's why we do it. We don't do it for the title. We don't do it for the honors and the glory, because as real leaders, we know that we own the bad stuff, and the honors and the glory usually don't come to us. They come to others, and it's that way for a good reason, because that's what attracts us to be leaders in the first place. It's not the ego. It's the service.
Mm.
Yeah, you know, when you say that, I'm reminded by the saying that I've tried to live by. There's no limit to what you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. And so it's very important that if somebody else wants to give you credit, that's okay, but don't ever take it, and always give it to others. And unless it hasn't gone well, then you accept it, you know, very quickly. And you know, I've just seen leaders that accepted the mistakes, and even if they didn't deserve all the blame, they took it all. You know, that's the kind of people you want to follow as you go into that. And I think we all think about these critical leadership moments. You mentioned 9/11. It was a flashback to me where I was at 9/11. I was with my previous company, and we had 1,000 people from around the world celebrating awards day with their families and groups of people. And while I was on the stage giving out these awards, I get this message: a plane's hit a tower in New York. And I didn't know how big a plane. I thought maybe a small private plane. And then before the ceremony was over and everybody was excited, I realized we had a crisis on our hands. And so I was sitting there, and I have to communicate to these 1,000 people that are so excited and so happy that we've had this tragedy. It was the most difficult communication of my life, because how could I suddenly change my mood and communicate without panicking them and building some trust in them? Like, why hadn't I told them sooner? Of course, it was a judgment call. We could have stopped the ceremony, but we elected to go ahead. The most difficult of my life. And it was interesting, as people reflected to me later, they said, "We thought you were dying." Yeah, because you were so emotional. You thought you were going to tell us that you have this dread disease, because it came across. Of course, that was not the intent at all. But there are some of these communications that are really tough, and I've had a lot of opportunities to lead people. That was probably the toughest communication of my life, and I don't know how I would do it better, but I'm sure there would be a way. But I think we have sometimes those opportunities to go for it. It seems like what I see you're doing here is your teams have built resilience during all the catastrophes. And you know, I've seen that happen before, where, you know, you think after one, how can you possibly do another? Well, sometimes you build resilience, you're even better the next time. And so I sense that's what's going on as we have. Jane, another point you'd like to bring out about leadership? Yeah, I was so pleased with your first one.
Oh, gee. What else can I say? you've asked questions about how do we prepare the next generation of leaders. I don't know whether that's something
that'd be great. Please do.
I think it's a really interesting question that was asked in one of the earlier panels, and there's just no way to do it other than put them in leadership positions. You have to be absorbed into the whole experience to be able to lead. There's no other training than to be involved in crisis situations. And I talked a bit before about we do have a culture of volunteer organisations in Australia. So things like the rural firefighters or surf lifesavers, they're all volunteer organisations, and people have got community leadership roles. Something, having been on boards myself for over 30 years now, I was given the opportunity very early in my 30s to be on corporate boards because of my medical and business backgrounds, and they were skills that were sort of not widely around but sought after. And I remember it was an incredible mentoring experience being with leaders of those organisations and being mentored by them. But it was also a great lesson in understanding how much young leaders can bring to the party in their diversity of thinking, in their, I feel like the complete dinosaur now, because the thinking that comes from young people is just, it's not just diverse, it's left field, it's they question everything, and that's what my younger self, that's what I used to be like on a board. Now I feel as though I'm a bit staid, but I always used to ask what might appear to be a silly question, but when I reflect back on it now, it really wasn't. So getting young people, allowing them in positions, give them credibility of allowing them to take those positions earlier. Might make a few mistakes, but that's the best way to encourage our young leaders.
I think that's so important, and maybe one of the best lessons we could take out of this session is how do we really empower our young leaders so we can lead from them. There's a station here in the U.S. TV station called the History Channel, and the History Channel I think does some extremely good work. And I was up talking with them, and they were saying we've brought in a number of young leaders to help us think about the future. And this is 15 years ago. And they said, our concern is people will be watching TV on their cell phones, and we're not sure if they'll watch the History Channel on their cell phones. And I said, how silly is it that somebody would watch TV on their cell phone? I thought it was a ridiculous concept. But I could tell when I responded like that to these young leaders, they said, no, you don't understand. It's coming. It's going to be here. And now as I watch TV on my cell phone, I think about that frequently. But it's something about that, especially this generation, we can learn so much from, and they're leading. I think as Charles said before he had to leave us, it's the thought leaders that are there. It's not necessarily the title. And Larry brought that out. I think it's critical. So Roberto, as you think about leading our organization as our lead director, what's your biggest challenges?
So I think the GFCC is something that came out because of you and Deborah. When you step forward and you invite other organizations from around the globe to build a platform to work together. So one important thing about leadership that I believe is very valuable and that should be mentioned is that leaders build things. And so it's a kind of unique thing, I believe, that the capacity really to build things, and that has to be stressed. And the flip side of my previous comment about comparing Brazil and US and addressing your question is that that's a challenge for sure for a country like Brazil. But it's also because of that challenge, and Charles was leading a conversation with Gianna from Brazil. And maybe sometimes is not very well understood, but they're addressing that and building global partnerships, as Charles and Gianna comment. So I think that there are things that you need to face, right? And a third quick comment, I'll go back to your point, Chad, is that there are choices that are needed. And especially at this moment, in this crucial moment in history, right, when we need enlightenment in many places. I think that Larry mentioned the authority of knowledge. So we need to assure that in some way. But there are choices, and Jane commented about that, the courage to make choices. I think that's a very important thing. Back to the GFCC, I think that what really comes up is what do we build next, and how from this platform in which we can share ideas, we can build consensus on principles, as we talked, where we can get insights from leaders from 30 countries on leadership. How can we build next in terms of creating impact? So I think I'll leave it here.
Yeah, thank you, Roberto. Charles, welcome back. You can hear me okay? That's good. Time till you can come back. So I just asked you. We're getting close to the end of our time, but I want to make sure you have a chance to get in here again. I was asking you what you saw in the GFCC that you thought it would be valuable to Australia, that you wanted to bring it, or any other comments on leadership before we have to close. The floor is yours.
Sorry, to clarify your question, did you say, do I think the GFCC is valuable to Australia?
Yes. Let me say again. You saw something in the GFCC that you thought it would bring value to have Australia as a part of it. What was it you saw that gave you the vision to do that?
It was, I think, as Arthur Sinodinos, the Honourable Arthur Sinodinos and Greg Hunt said, it's a wonderful way of collaborating, networking with leaders around the world in different fields, and build friendships and learn from one another. There's absolutely no doubt. I've been honoured to participate and have the CSIRO driving it from the Australian side with their huge talent of scientists and the Australian Advisory Board we put together, including Rob Grenfell and Larry Marshall and Jane Wilson. It's been very effective, and the values are important. And I think, and it's philanthropic, and we just learn from one another. And nobody's got a monopoly on every, So to learn on best practice from other countries, it can help us improve the standard of living of our own country if we develop from that.
That's great. If I could just share a story of how this started way back when, the U.S. Council
30 years ago.
Yeah, the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, which Deborah was the head of. We saw Deborah, as our president, was reaching out to other countries to share our best practices. So our board's natural reaction is, don't tell them all of our secrets. We're in competition with them. And so the board asked me to go visit with Deborah and help her understand reality, or I forget what and so I listened to Deborah. She said, no, I think we can learn. It was Mexico as our first country we were partnered with. I think we can learn from each other. We can be both better. It's not we versus they. And then she
exactly
Brazil, and it took a while, and then finally I had to go back to the board. I said, I think Deborah's right. And so it started informal, and then finally, it's become what it has under Roberto's leadership now. So I just
it's all bipartisan, and it's all improving, peace and the standard of living and wealth creation, productivity and competition for all of us together in the world. I mean, there's no, it's not fragmented. I mean, we can all work together.
Yeah, that's great. Let me go around one more. So we got 1 minute each. Larry, any last words you'd like to tell our 700 plus people gathered here today?
Yeah, if COVID's taught us one thing only, it's that when we collaborate, we are far better as a world. To your point, Chad, we can be in co-opetition, but when we collaborate, we can still compete, but we can also share things. Then we can all be successful. And to me, that's the heart of what it is that you do, and why I'm so proud to be part of it.
Great. Jane?
Yes, Chad, it's great to be part of this, and congratulations to the GFCC as well. I guess I'd just like to say, whilst I'm incredibly proud and happy about Australia's response to COVID, we're only as strong as our weakest link. So we need the whole world to be coping well with COVID. Australia can sit here in splendid isolation and say, well, aren't we clever? We're surrounded by water and we're managing this very well because we have a good health system as well. But we need to have the whole world manage the COVID crisis well. So all of us need to be working together globally to manage this crisis.
Thank you. Great guidance. Charles?
I echo what Jane said completely. We have to work together. I'm heartened to hear that the Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca seem to have are getting close to a vaccine that's being tested. And I'm not a scientist, not an expert in this field, but it's just again, I come back to mankind and the human abilities to make things happen. And I've got confidence and trust and pray that it'll all work out soon and we can get rid of this jolly virus and get back to normal life.
That sounds great. Roberto, we want to thank you for your leadership in making all this happen. And I think it's only fitting that you have the last word on the last panel. Roberto.
Hey, you're very kind. You're very kind, Chad. So I think that we're very lucky to be here with our colleagues and partners in Australia. And I was personally very impressed to see how Australia is using the crisis to build a future. A country that doubles the investment in vocational training. It's really trying to weather that and leverage this situation as an opportunity. And we are only here because of you, Charles. And thanks again for your leadership in doing this. And three things. Enlightenment, and I think Larry brought that, the authority of knowledge. It's very much needed at this point in the world. The key thing probably for one organization like the GFCC is how we can accelerate and build more impactful partnerships. So getting to the how is very important. And finally, you were talking about Deborah. I have the pleasure to work with Deborah. And you were saying that you, Chad, were, let's say, the board asked you to talk her about reality. But Deborah is someone who changed reality. So I'll stop here because I think at the end, it's about changing realities.
Wonderful, Roberto. Thank you, everybody. And thanks for everybody joining this session. Everybody have a safe rest of your day and rest of the year. We'll sign off now.
And thank you, Chad, for doing such a great job.
Thank you. We'll sign off.